Just another phrase that I hear that I wanted to mention, which can cause anger in a lot of people, is the phrase moving on.
We'd love to find out what does it mean to the person moving on, because each person might interpret it in different ways. Some people might find it extremely hard to cope with grief because they cannot hold the pain. What we try to say with grief is just take a day at a time. Sometimes just an hour at a time.
What advice would you have for someone for coping with those bad days? Welcome to the Life and Loss podcast, where we break down barriers surrounding discussions of death and grief, making listeners feel less alone. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back Dania, a counsellor based at Forest Holme Hospice. And in this interview, we will uncover if there's such thing as moving on following loss. So welcome back, Dania.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So to start with then, a lot of people say, this grief is so intense, how long will I feel this way for? What do you say when people ask you that?
Yes, so it's a very good question. It's a question that often people ask, and we can't answer really, because there is no right or wrong length of time of grief. And for some people, it can be well over a year. For some people, 2 or 3 years. It depends on the circumstances and on the support around them as well.
In general, though, is there a point where the grief feels a bit less intense or eases slightly?
Yes, so people start to feel, they themselves notice this, because what we try to say with grief is just take a day at a time. Sometimes it's just an hour at a time. And so sometimes they might come and say, oh, well, I haven't cried for the last 2 days, or I have been able to go out for a walk, or so they themselves realize that the grief is not as intense as it might have been before.
Yeah. And are there different factors that are going on in people's lives that affect how raw that grief feels and how long that feels raw for?
Yes, so that will depend very much on their life experiences and how, even sometimes you have to go back to childhood and how were they nurtured and looked after. So they might be more resilient to life challenges. Some people might find it extremely hard to cope with grief because they cannot hold the pain. So they will be distracting themselves. So the problem with grief is painful, and nobody wants to really sit with it. And it's exactly what you need to do. You need to let the pain of the grief come through. But for this, you need to have some really good support around you. So that's what I would say about the rawness of grief.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that your childhood can actually play a big part in how you grieve later in life.
Yes.
And many people wouldn't think that necessarily.
No.
So can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes. So what we will do in, if people came for counselling and they are really struggling with grief, we might ask them how they were brought up, what happened to them, and, if they had a problem, who would they go to? And sometimes we say, well, no one, because my parents were too busy or whatever. So they've never learned to manage difficult emotion. And so when this happens, they just don't know how to do it. So they've got to learn it as an adult. And so that's what we would be going through and give strategy to help them to cope with holding the grief. Sometimes we say, it's got to be little steps, because grief can be so painful. Sometimes we say, if you just take 5 minutes and just sit down, look at some pictures, think about your loved one, you might be crying, but at least you are letting it out, because you will do anything to stop the pain.
I hope that you're finding this episode useful. Perhaps you have a question that you'd like to ask. You can do this by commenting below. Your input shapes the conversations we have and the topics that we explore. So don't hesitate to reach out and let us know what you'd like to hear more of. Just another phrase that I hear that I wanted to mention, which can cause anger in a lot of people, is the phrase moving on. What are your thoughts on this phrase? Is it possible? Is it unrealistic?
Right, so this is very interesting, because there is a bit of a use of language, because we'd have to find out what does it mean to the person moving on, because each person might interpret it in different ways. So I've had a client who was saying that she felt she had to move forward because she had bills to pay, she had to go to work, she had the children to look after, And so they might see a difference between I have to move forward and moving on from the grief. So again, this will be something that we will talk to the individual person to try to understand where they are with the moving. Also, when you're talking about moving forward, sometimes people might think of, am I moving backwards? Now, in my experience of grief, because grief is a journey, and you start at one point and you're going through it, you don't ever go back to the beginning. But sometimes, when you have a bad day, you feel like, oh my God, I'm going back to where I started from. But you don't. You have moved a little bit, because life is not static. Everything is moving. So eventually you do move with the grief, but at your own pace. That's why when you were asking, how long does it take, we can't say it, because each person will grieve in different ways.
Yeah, and I suppose by the phrase moving on, sometimes it applies that you're leaving your grief behind,
yes.
Whereas moving forwards, yes. you still remembering that person, but you're moving forward with your life. Is that?
Yes, this is a very good point, and actually I was going to make it and I just jumped to something else, but you're quite right. People sometimes feel that when they are moving, whether forward or on, what's happening, they are leaving their loved one behind. I've had clients that might have felt really bad on New Year's Day, because the year has ended and it's a year where their loved one was still there, and they don't want to go into a new year without their loved one. So you're quite right there, Hannah.
Yeah. And are there any sort of general signs that show that someone's ready to take that next step in their life? Perhaps they might start working again, or they might start a new hobby, or they might start dating again, for example. What sort of signs would they feel in themselves?
So they will know, because it's like, they get up in the morning and they feel they might have a bit more energy, they might start to get into a routine. I've spoken on other podcasts about some people might enjoy really, gardening. They might exercise, do things that start to make them feel like they're getting back into a form of routine, which is the one that we see on the grieving wheel. Where you go around in circle, but at some point you get back in a form of routine. And when you do this, you start to realize, okay, I am getting different to how I was when I first started with the grief.
And if someone, say, feels like they're on that path where they're moving forwards and they're beginning to enjoy things in life again, but then there might suddenly be a bad day that they weren't expecting, what advice would you have for someone for coping with those bad days?
So it's remembering that feelings are not permanent. So they might have had a bad dreams, they might have had bad nights. Anything can happen where they wake up in the morning and they feel, I just can't cope today. It's remembering they might be okay in 2 hours. They will be okay the following day. Now, again, we've mentioned this before, but if they felt that they were having bad days, more than a couple of bad days and so on, and they are not really getting out of it, then we will always say to go and see the GP as well.
Thank you so much, Dania, and thank you for joining us for the Life and Loss podcast. If you'd like more information on our work, you can visit our website, which is forestholmehospice.org.uk. Thank you. Please remember to like, comment and share this episode to help us reach more people. At Forest Holme Hospice Charity, we offer this podcast and many other resources to support people through life's most difficult times. If our work has made a difference to you, please consider making a donation by visiting the link in the description. Thank you.